I've noticed something interesting after years of watching people who are just barely getting by. They're not lazy. They're not clueless about money. They know they should save. They know they shouldn't spend impulsively. They know they need an emergency fund. But every month it's the same story. Money comes in, and then it disappears fast. What's interesting is that the problem usually isn't the income number itself. It's the mental state of constantly feeling like there's no breathing room. When you always feel like your money could run out at any moment, your brain switches into survival mode. And in survival mode, people don't optimize for the future. They optimize for reducing stress right now. Most people don't realize that living paycheck to paycheck isn't just a money issue. It's a nervous system under constant pressure. So if you try to save by forcing more discipline, cutting harder, tightening everything, you might actually be fighting the wrong battle. Today, I'm not talking about how to save more. I want to talk about how to create stability first, because when stability exists, saving starts to happen naturally. Main point 1. Stability matters more than growth. I've noticed that a lot of people try to level up while their finances are still fragile. They set goals to save 20% or 30% of their income. They create detailed plans. They decide to start over completely. But then, one small disruption hits. An unexpected bill, a week with fewer work hours, a surprise expense, and everything falls apart. The problem isn't lack of willpower. The problem is they're trying to build growth on unstable ground. Most people don't realize that when your finances are shaky, your first goal shouldn't be more money. It should be fewer crises, fewer last-minute loans, fewer emergency scrambles, fewer moments where your heart jumps when you see a charged notification. I once watched two people with the same low income. The first tried to save aggressively, but every month something forced them to dip back into it. The second didn't aim high. They focused on making their recurring expenses more predictable. They renegotiated rent. They aligned bill due dates. They reduced expenses that made cash flow unpredictable. After a few months, the second person wasn't richer, but they were calmer. And that calm was the foundation. When your mind isn't constantly on alert, you make better decisions. You spend less just to relieve stress. You stick to plans more consistently. Saving doesn't really start with a number. It starts with a sense of safety. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, don't ask, how do I save more? Ask, how do I make this month less chaotic than last month? If you can do that consistently for a few months, you're already ahead of most people. Main point 2. Don't let emotions decide when you spend. I've realized that many bad financial decisions don't happen because the amount is huge. They happen because the timing is wrong. Most people don't notice that they tend to spend when they're tired, bored, or coming off a stressful day. In those moments, spending isn't just a transaction. It becomes a reward, a pressure release, a way to feel in control again. It's simple. After a mentally exhausting week, you tell yourself, I deserve this. The issue isn't the item. The issue is your brain looking for immediate relief. When you live paycheck to paycheck, you don't have much margin for error. One emotional decision can ripple through the entire month. I've observed something interesting. The people who improve financially aren't always the ones who spend the least. They're the ones who avoid spending in emotionally intense moments. They don't buy when they're overly excited. They don't buy when they're deeply upset. They don't buy when they're exhausted. They use a simple rule. If it's not planned, wait 24 hours. It sounds small, but that pause completely changes the quality of the decision. When you come back a day later, most of the urgency is gone. Not because you're stingier, but because you're deciding with logic instead of stress hormones. Living paycheck to paycheck doesn't give you many chances to recover from mistakes. So controlling when you decide matters more than controlling how much you spend. Don't try to become someone who never wants anything. Become someone who doesn't buy when emotions are driving. That difference is powerful. Main point 3. More income doesn't fix pressure if the structure stays the same. Here's something people don't like to hear. A raise doesn't automatically make you feel financially secure. I've seen many people move from low income to something more comfortable. Yet, their mental state stays the same. still anxious, still tight at the end of the month, still wondering where the money went. Most people don't notice that when income rises, lifestyle quietly rises with it. A slightly nicer apartment, a better phone, eating out more often, upgrades that feel deserved. None of the changes seem dramatic on their own, but together, the entire spending structure expands. The issue isn't reckless spending. The issue is that the system never changed. If you used to spend emotionally, you'll just spend emotionally on more expensive things. If you never controlled payment timing, you'll just have more bills in the same chaos. I once watched two people get raises at the same time. One immediately upgraded their lifestyle to match the new income. The other kept most of their old structure for 6 months. After half a year, the second person had real breathing room, not because they earned more, but because they didn't let costs expand right away. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't just about low income. It's about the gap between income and expenses being too small. If every raise is matched by higher spending, you'll stay in the same place. So when you earn more, don't ask, "What should I upgrade?" Ask, "How long can I keep my current structure?" That gap you create, even temporarily, becomes your cushion. No one escapes this cycle with one big leap. They escape by widening the space between money in and money out, even slightly. Main point 4. Uncertainty makes you spend more than you think. One of the most dangerous things about living paycheck to paycheck isn't lack of money, it's lack of clarity. When you don't know exactly how much you can safely spend, your brain fills in the gaps with assumptions. And assumptions are usually optimistic. Most people don't spend because they want to. They spend because everything seems fine. There's still money in the account. The card still works. No bills are overdue. But what they don't see are the charges coming in 5 days, 10 days. That uncertainty creates a false sense of safety. I once asked someone, "Do you know exactly how much you can spend in the next 3 days?" They said, "I think I'm okay." "I think" is one of the most dangerous phrases in personal finance. When you don't have a clear number for what's truly safe to spend, every small decision is based on feeling. And when feelings lead, spending creeps up. Just a little. Not enough to panic, but enough to come up short at the end of the month. The people who slowly break out of this pattern aren't using complex tracking systems. They do one simple thing. They always know the exact amount that's safe to use for a short window of time, not the total balance, but the portion that won't interfere with upcoming obligations. When you know that number, you stop asking, "Do I have money?" You ask, "Is this inside my safe zone?" Clarity eliminates most mistakes, not because you're smarter, but because you're no longer guessing. Living paycheck to paycheck is exhausting because you're constantly guessing. Remove the uncertainty, and you remove a huge invisible pressure. Main point 5. Don't try to tighten everything at once. I've noticed that whenever someone decides to fix their finances, they often go extreme. They want to fix everything. Cut eating out. Cancel every subscription. No shopping. No entertainment. Track every single dollar. It sounds disciplined, but most people don't realize this approach creates intense psychological pressure. When you're already living paycheck to paycheck, life is already stressful. If you turn your finances into an all-out battle, your brain will eventually push back. I've seen the same cycle over and over. Week 1, highly motivated. Week 2, starting to feel drained. Week 3, a well-deserved reward. And then everything resets. It's not a lack of willpower. It's that you tried to change too much at once. Sustainable finances don't come from one big squeeze. They come from small adjustments repeated consistently. Instead of cutting 5 expenses, pick 1. Instead of changing every habit, change one moment. For example, if you tend to overspend on weekends, don't ban weekend spending entirely. Just set a limit before the weekend begins. If you impulse buy at the grocery store, don't force yourself to stop going. Just decide on 3 must-have items and don't add anything beyond that list. What's interesting is that small changes trigger far less resistance. And when you sustain just one change for a few months, you start believing you can actually manage money. That belief matters more than any saving hack. Living paycheck to paycheck makes you feel reactive. Every small success gives you back a little control. Don't try to become a completely different person in 30 days. Just become 5% better this month. That difference compounds. Main point 6. Shame keeps you stuck longer than low income. I've realized something subtle but extremely dangerous. Many people don't escape paycheck to paycheck living not because they lack solutions, but because they feel ashamed. Ashamed when their account balance is close to zero. Ashamed when they have to decline plans because they can't afford it. Ashamed when they hear others talk about investing or financial freedom. And when people feel shame, they usually do one of two things. They hide, or they spend to prove they're doing fine. Most people don't realize that part of their spending isn't about real needs. It's about image. A new phone to avoid feeling behind. A more expensive dinner to avoid feeling inferior. A trip they can't afford because everyone's going. The issue isn't the item, it's the motivation behind it. When spending is used to soothe shame, it almost never has a stopping point because the feeling of not being enough is hard to fill with purchases. I once asked someone, if no one else would see it, would you still buy it? That question made them pause. Living paycheck to paycheck can make you feel like you're behind. But the more you try to prove otherwise through spending, the wider the gap becomes. Breaking this cycle starts with something simple, but not easy. Stop using money to defend your ego. When you no longer need to maintain an image, you free up more money than you realized. Sustainable wealth doesn't come from impressing people, it comes from not needing to. And when you're no longer ashamed of your starting point, you can finally build calmly, step by step. Main point 7. If you don't design boundaries, money will find a way out. I've realized that money is neutral. It doesn't automatically stay. It doesn't automatically disappear. But if you don't set clear boundaries, money will always flow in the easiest direction. Most people don't actually have spending boundaries. They have hope. Hope that this month will be better. Hope they won't overspend. Hope there will be something left. But hope isn't a system. When you live paycheck to paycheck, every small decision matters. And if limits aren't set before money arrives, any limit afterward is just damage control. I've seen something very clearly. People who gradually stabilize financially don't always earn more, but they always have a few fixed boundaries. For example, a monthly cap for eating out, a fixed amount transferred to a separate account right after payday, a minimum balance that must remain before the next paycheck. These boundaries aren't punishment. They reduce the number of decisions you have to make. When boundaries are pre-designed, you don't have to debate yourself every time you want to spend. You just ask, is this inside my boundary? If yes, you spend without guilt. If no, you stop without arguing internally. Living paycheck to paycheck is exhausting because you're constantly deciding. Good boundaries reduce that exhaustion. And when you're less mentally drained, you make fewer mistakes. Money doesn't leave because you're bad with it. It leaves because you didn't build guardrails. Designing boundaries before money arrives is a small step with a huge impact. Main point 8. You don't lack discipline. You lack a safety zone. I've noticed many people blame themselves too quickly. They say, I'm just not disciplined. I'm weak with money. I can't stick to a plan. But when I look closer at their situation, I see a pattern. They have no safety zone, no small emergency cushion, no gap between income and expenses, no week of breathing room if something happens. Without a safety zone, every financial decision feels like survival. And when everything feels like survival, your brain chooses immediate certainty over long-term benefit. Most people don't realize that discipline can't survive in constant stress. You can push for a few weeks, but if every month carries the fear of, will this be enough? Discipline slowly drains away. I've seen two people with nearly identical spending. One panics whenever an unexpected expense shows up. The other has a small cushion, not huge, but enough to avoid reacting instantly. When the same problem appears, the second person doesn't rush to borrow or slash randomly. They have time to think. And time is the difference. A safety zone doesn't have to be 3 months of expenses. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, even a modest buffer can change how money feels. When you have a cushion, you're less afraid. When you're less afraid, you spend less out of panic. And when you spend less out of panic, you start keeping more. So before asking, how do I save more? Ask, do I have a minimum safety zone? Discipline is the result of a stable environment. It's not the starting point. Main point 9. The way you talk to yourself determines how long you keep money. I've realized something most people overlook. It's not just income. It's not just spending. It's your internal dialogue about money. When living paycheck to paycheck, it's easy to think, I'm just bad with money. I'm not the kind of person who builds savings. No matter what I do, it disappears. Those thoughts seem harmless, but they create an identity. And when you believe you're someone who can't keep money, you behave accordingly. Most people don't notice that every time they break a plan, instead of adjusting the system, they judge themselves. I failed again. When you treat a financial mistake as proof that you're incapable, you're more likely to give up. I've watched people improve their situation despite very difficult starting points. What they had in common wasn't higher intelligence. They just spoke to themselves differently. When they overspent, they didn't say, I'm terrible. They asked, what in my system led to this? That question changes everything. One path leads to shame and quitting. The other leads to adjustment and continuation. Living paycheck to paycheck is already stressful. If you attack yourself on top of that, you double the pressure. Money responds strongly to psychology. When you see yourself as someone learning to manage money, you become more patient. And patience allows change to accumulate. You don't escape this cycle with one perfect month. You escape it by not quitting after an imperfect one. The way you talk to yourself determines whether you continue or stop. Conclusion: escaping the cycle doesn't start with money. It starts with calm. I've noticed that most people who eventually escape paycheck to paycheck living don't do it through one big breakthrough, not through a lucky opportunity, not through unexpected money, not through one flawless month. They change their pace. They stop panicking. They stop shaming themselves. They stop trying to fix everything at once. Instead, they choose the smallest controllable point, a boundary, a small cushion, a decision not to buy in an emotional moment, a healthier internal dialogue. Most people think they need more money to feel safe. But interestingly, when you create a sense of safety first, you begin keeping more money. Stability creates clarity. Clarity creates better decisions. Better decisions create space between income and expenses. And that space, even if small at first, is where freedom begins. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, don't try to change everything after watching this. Pick one idea that resonates most. Stick with it until it feels normal, then add the next step. Money doesn't require perfection. It requires slightly more consistency than last month. If this message reflects your situation, hit like so I know this topic matters to you. And if you want deeper, realistic guidance on money psychology and building wealth calmly, without pressure or hype, subscribe to the channel. We don't need to get rich fast. We need to get stable first. I'll see you in the next video.